What's up, guys? I'm going to be doing live streams. I'm going to be doing this more often, and I'm going to actually announce it.
Nice. Hey, do you mind if I share this live stream on like my social or anything like that?
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Don't mind? Cool.
Because when you present this argument, man, this is why people have the stinks.
Did Bongo the chimp share his banana with another chimp? Is that what you mean by morality? Okay.
I mean, does a snake talk?
Well, I mean, if evolution's true and we all came from a single cell, technically, isn't that pond scum that we come from?
Pond scum is pond scum. A single-celled organism is a single-celled organism.
At the end of the day, the evidence is not. I mean, we might just have to agree to disagree on that, but
Yeah, I mean, we're going to. I mean, for one, you give yourself away with the pond scum evolution thing. You are proving to be exactly like Matt Powell.
Well, don't we come from pond scum?
All right, what's up, you ragers? I am not getting anything right, so hopefully it will stay okay. Still having connection issues. It looks like I got a strong connection now. Dr. Josh is here. He's going to join us. He's going to tell me what he thought about the debate. John is here. And we're going to throw a link in the side chat here shortly. I want to go for about an hour and a half, not a long open room, but I'd love for you guys to come in. If you saw the debate, tell me what you thought about it. All of that. But first, we're going to spend a few minutes with our friend Dr. Josh, and he could tell me what he thought and address maybe a couple of the issues that I thought were huge glaring issues for CJ, and maybe things that CJ just might be wrong about. But what's up, John?
Real quick before you throw it to Dr. Josh, I do want to share something with both of you that CJ just posted directly after the debate, which I thought was hilarious. He was very magnanimous, as he always is, but he said, and I quote, "Just finished a debate with Nakasuchi on the tire prophecy, parenthesized host at Is That So 19. Very solid talk. I appreciate the both of them having me on. Not going to lie, though, I think I killed it this time. Sorry, you, man, you didn't kill it."
Yeah, I'm not sure if because he would never address, he would never address the fact that he was making a theological conclusion at all. But we'll get to that. CJ's always fun to talk to, and he did address the fact after the show that there are a couple things we probably need to talk to in regards to some of the issues I stand for, and we're gonna have that conversation live or off air. We'll see. I thought I did really well, considering and I told this to CJ. For me, it's a rare point when it's a very rare moment when I'm gonna really prop up biblical history, but biblical history really seems to correlate with what history says. So, and I'll let Dr. Josh speak to that when it comes to this. But even if your own biblical historians are telling you a thing, you would think that would lend some kind of credence with CJ. Unfortunately, he doesn't seem to trust any historical scholar that says anything that he might not agree with. That the way I took it, that's a liberal scholar, or what? How did he put it? A scoffing scholar. That was his word.
Well, and the funny thing is in the person that he threw up to you, Jefferson Spatchcock looked him up, and he wasn't an academic at all. He was some preacher. That David something or whatever he was mentioning. Yeah. And
that doesn't surprise me. That does tend to happen. It happened with Chris Keith when it came to the dinosaur soft tissue. And like it did, like the one guy that I can't remember the guy's name, but he did mention another guy that I looked up on the spot, and it's some guy from the 1600s. And I'm like, I don't even know if that's a historian or not. I just saw that he existed and he lived in the 1600s. So.
Do you want to say hi?
Hey.
He just came busting in the room.
I think he's like he's your future YouTube star there.
Can you say You say, hi, Nakasuchi.
Hi, Nakasuchi.
Hi, Mr. John.
Hi.
Hey, Oliver, what's up?
Coffin.
It's you, okay. All right. I hear you. I love you. Sorry.
Oh no, I should use that that Hi Nakasuchi forever now, but it is YouTube hates children. So
Yeah, for
real. So yeah, I mean, interesting debate, and always, that blonde hair gets me every time, Dr. Josh.
It's his mother's, I think. I mean, maybe it's mine when I was little. I don't remember.
Yeah, my brother had blonde hair when he was young, and then grew out of it. But I don't know. That's blonde, so that might be staying.
Blonde hair, blue eyes.
I'm so old that the joke would have been back when I was a kid. What color is the milkman's hair?
I have funny stories about jokes that I've told about that sort of thing at very inopportune moments, but I'll save them for another time.
So yeah, I mean, it was a fun debate. I can't even remember. There was one thing that he brought up that I hadn't really prepared for, and then we'll get into what you was reading right before we came on, Dr. Josh, because on the fly I looked up about Alexander the Great, and it I read he massacred the people, he breached the city, he got inside the city. So I'm like, all right, yeah, he destroyed the city. But you say that might not necessarily, or probably that wasn't actually the case. So
yeah, I mean, like I'm obviously not a Greek historian, and it's a period. It's later than what I tend to specialize in, but this is a 2018 or 19 publication. I can't remember. But Eli talks about how Alexander got in, and I can read the whole quote again if you're interested in that, but essentially got... Sorry, did you say?
Well, yeah, you can if you want to. Sure, I don't mind, but yeah, if you want to. If not, you can just summarize it or however you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point was that he ordered an assault through the breaches in the wall and slaughtered or enslaved the people, but like the king and like some of the administration that had been hiding out in the temple, he left them in charge, made sacrifices there on the in the city. But the comment that sort of stood out to me, the line that sort of stood out was, the island town of Tyre was not destroyed because it was under the protection of Heracles, Milcart, to whom Alexander offered the sacred Tyrian ship dedicated to his god. He presided over the lavish sacrifices made to Heracles, paid his men, and organized the funerals for those among his forces who had died. So, I mean, again, I'm not a historian of the period. It's outside of my specialization, but it seems like...
Yeah, it seemed like he sacked the town and put a lot of the people to the sword. A lot of the Tyrians were able to escape. Part of that, what you read was, like 15,000 Tyrians were took it into one of their ally ships and protected. Yeah. So it looks like he sacked the town. Sure, put the people to the sword. Probably rebuilt the areas he had trashed, but this idea that the city was destroyed and then rebuilt anew as some new Greek city, well, that's just doesn't seem to be historically the case.
And I mean, we can talk about whatever aspects you like. I didn't get to see the whole debate, unfortunately, but some of the parts that I saw, I think part of the issue here is trying to find apologists that I encounter, be it on the page or here on, social media, tend to try to find aspects that they think were fulfilled as opposed, you said this several times while I was listening. In order for the prophecy to be fulfilled, it has to be fulfilled, right?
Yeah.
So, talking about what Nebuchadnezzar is immediately supposed to do, and the things that he's supposed to do aren't done, right? And so, I mean, I know you guys sort of went back and forth about, this Hebrew phrase or, this syntactical unit, but
yeah, he seemed really focused.
Boiled down to.
Yeah, he seemed really focused on that because I made that statement. As far as I know, that statement was true. But then I showed several other indicators that said, this is just how Nebuchadnezzar's army was just described. And even he acknowledged, yeah, historically there was many nations under the banner of Babylon. I mean, everybody knows this. You ever watch 300?
Well, and I think the thing that maybe got overlooked a little bit, and I think you had it in your presentation. There are two passages that parallel in general idea the way that Nebuchadnezzar's army was described. So one is in Jeremiah 34. Again, I think you had these in your presentation. But Jeremiah 34, he's commanding and bringing all of the mamlechot, the kingdoms, right? The kingdoms are in his land, and then all the peoples. This is the. I mean, if somebody wanted to pull that up or whatever, but you must have, because you also read from Ezekiel 23, the other passage.
Mm-hmm. I definitely read it, and then I referred to it again. I was like, Jeremiah described Nebuchadnezzar's army this way. I was like, and he admitted to me, like, Ezekiel was there. He saw Nebuchadnezzar's army with his own eyes. He described it that way. And then I showed, like you had shown me, where these sections are connected to each other, and one kind of plays off of the other and describes the other. And this is just, this is kind of what makes it a hermeneutical error for them, right? Like,
so I think like the bottom. For me, anyway, and I think, again, for consensus scholarship in the field, the critical questions are, what does the prophecy say in Ezekiel 26? Right? That's number one. And then what is Ezekiel doing in Ezekiel 29? So those two questions are paramount.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up with you, Dr. Josh, because he a couple times made the point, well, if Ezekiel was admitting that he was wrong, that first prophecy wasn't fulfilled in 29, he would have been executed. I don't think that's the case. For a couple of reasons, and again, this isn't just me thinking this. And if people are interested in like a bibliographic. A bibliography on some of these sources. I mean, you could give it to them now. Yeah, but, I will be actually, because I did refer to a lot of sources throughout this debate. So after this after show, because it's been a busy day, I will get all the sources that I referred to into the description, so people can check out some of the scholars that I was talking about and the things that they were saying as well.
I just want to pipe in and say that, CJ did a good job. He had a hopeless task. I mean, the debate hadn't even been, going on for 5 minutes, and atheist pastor had quoted Ezekiel 26:21, I will bring you to a horrible end, and you will be no more. You will be sought, but you will never again be found, declares the sovereign Lord. Tyre still exists to this day. I mean, it's quite clear. You will be no more. People will seek you, but you will never be found again. Like, I mean, it's cut and dry as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, and that does seem to be the apologetic here. And me and Dr. Josh had this conversation because, like, the problem that this actually offers for Christians is the fact that it challenges a lot of the omni aspects of God. So either either Ezekiel was getting a true prophecy or not. If you're going to maintain he's a true prophet, well, then clearly God changed up in the middle of all of this, right? Nebuchadnezzar couldn't do it, and so God, like, so it becomes to where, like, you know, God can see the end, but the middle ground becomes all gray, and that's where free will comes in, and blah 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 blah. This is a huge problem, because either God is omni or not. Either he can see a perfect future or he can't. So
I would encourage, you know, people, you know, including CJ, if they're interested in what I would consider to be mainstream evangelical theological responses to Ezekiel 26, go look at, there are two articles that I think are really useful, and I apologize for the kids in the background.
Oh no, you're good. I'm gonna step away and check on my dinner. I'll be right back, Dr. Josh. But please continue.
Chris Udd, and you know what? I can probably pull the title of the article up.
He turned his camera off. Oh, there he goes. He saw it. He had my avatar up for a minute.
So Chris Udd in 2005, I think it's Tyndale Bulletin, prediction and foreknowledge in Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre. So Chris Udd, evangelical scholar, he's writing in Tyndale, for goodness sake. And the way that he opens the article is the summary, like the abstract is, Ezekiel's prophecy that Tyre would be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar was not fulfilled in the manner predicted by the prophet. This is demonstrated from extra-biblical literature, supported by archaeological evidence, and acknowledged by Ezekiel himself in a later prophecy. As a result, it is argued that the passage supports a worldview in which God is sometimes willing to adjust his plan from what he initially declared. This supports a relational view over the conventional deterministic view of divine foreknowledge, and it helps ease the tension between the test of a true prophet and a true prophet whose prediction is not fully realized. So I'm not saying that I agree with his theological conclusion, but the point is that, you know, people like Chris Udd, Robert Chisholm, they're writing, Robert Chisholm's, the title of the article is something like, if divine prophecy fails, check your hermeneutic, something like that.
Well, can I?
Yeah, sure.
I find that fascinating because, okay, and the person you just quoted is a theologian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so his take on it is that God's foreknowledge is not perfect then, or that he sometimes changes his mind on the things that he foresees?
Yeah, so like the way that, and I don't remember all the details of Udd's argument, but one of the interesting aspects of Udd's argument, I mean, his paper, is that he goes through sort of these standard apologetic arguments and shows why they're not sound, which is why that article is interesting to me. But like Robert Chisholm makes the argument, and again, I think that if you're going at this from a theological perspective, fine. But what they argue is, for example, Nineveh, you know, if you remember the story of Jonah, and Jonah goes and says, you know, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed. And then Nineveh repents, right, in sackcloth and ashes, and they cry out to God, and God changes his mind. And so this idea that prophecy is inherently contingent, that it's, you know, the point of it is, you know, it's the speech act theory. It's what is it that the prophecy is trying to do? And the prophecy is oftentimes trying to threaten people, in a sense, to get them to repent. And so, again, I don't think that, for me, that's not a sufficient answer. But if you are starting with the presupposition, or starting with the conclusion that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and that you can't have a failed prophecy that just flat out fails, then, you know, this is a way that you can turn to, you know, make that fit. Of course, the problem is that it's difficult to falsify, I think.
Yeah, well, and the only one, because you can't possibly be right, because even, you know, and I explained this to CJ. So what you've done as an apologetic essentially is comb through history and came and found the person that came the closest to doing what Ezekiel said, and but close when it comes to prophecy doesn't count, right? Like it's that's the whole. And you mentioned it, like a prophecy has to be fulfilled. You have to fulfill it, and at near the end of it, it did seem like he was shifting the goalposts there a lot, because he was like, well, even Nebuchadnezzar did win, essentially, and I'm like, yes, but that's. Nobody's saying that he didn't, that those kings didn't eventually pay homage to him. The point is he didn't breach the city. The prophecy wasn't fulfilled. And of course, Tyre is still there to this very day in the same spot it always has been. We not only remember it, we can fly there. So.
And I think, see, this is really the issue for me. The goal for me in putting out videos and talking about Ezekiel 26 is not to prove to Christians that their belief is false. That's not the goal. Any more than when I talk about slavery, that's as if that's some sort of, all right, this is proof that your God is false or that your beliefs are false. What I'm doing is I'm trying to say, let's all start with the correct data points, right? Let's all start from and this is what Chris Udd is doing, right? And this is what scholars in the field are doing. They're saying, where do we start? Well, we have to start with the realization that not only historically is there a problem with this, but Ezekiel himself talks about this being a problem, right? So,
Yeah, I think that's the major important thing to hammer down here is like, of course we're right about this, Dr. Josh, they're wrong. But that being said, it doesn't disprove the Christian God at all.
Sure.
It maybe raises some question to Ezekiel's authenticity, but it does not. For me, it does nothing to really diminish the Bible outside of the fact that some Christians go around and say every single prophecy in the Bible was fulfilled, and here is a glaring one that wasn't. It goes against what they say more than anything.
I think that what I would say, and I'm just coming up with this off the top of my head, so forgive me if the analogy falls apart. But like if I were to say, drop this pencil and it were to fall, and I would say, before we knew anything about gravity, if I were to say, okay, well, there are, 100 demons that are pulling this down toward hell, and that's, everything gets pulled toward hell, right? And then we come to realize that, objects that have mass, or whatever, pull things toward themselves, and this is something called gravity. It doesn't necessarily disprove the demon thing, right? Maybe they work in tandem. Maybe the demons are using gravity. But what it does is it presents an alternative that perhaps is more plausible.
Yeah.
And so I think with things like, these prophecies, or with things like slavery, looking at these things or source criticism or any of these things that I talk about on the channel, it's not so much to say, aha, see, this proves your Bible wrong. It's to say, okay, if you're going to argue that God, this is okay because of this theological argument, that's fine. But what you're doing is, it's making, in my opinion, and certainly to my own conclusion, it's making the likelihood of that interpretive model less likely, the likelihood less likely.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Josh, so I don't know if you heard this part, but if you did, what did you think of CJ's argument that, it just went out of my head. Knock had pointed out, I sat here for that whole.
Sorry, no, that's my fault.
No, it's not your fault.
That's why I write everything down.
I'm having a boomer moment here. But go ahead. I'll remember.
There was one very interesting thing that he kept insisting, and I was just like, as far as I know, that this just isn't true, because he kept insisting that at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, people telling me that I'm mispronouncing that wrong in the side chat, and I never know if they're right or if my mispronouncing is just crazy. And I hope you missed the part where I mispronounced anals.
I did not. I heard it, and I laughed.
I mean, I listened to that damn video over and over and over again, and I still
that was the sexiest moment of this.
I know it's like
annals are annual, right?
Annals,
annual.
yeah.
So if you,
yeah. I did it, and I'm like, I knew I was gonna do it live, because of course I would do it live. And then I knew it at the moment I did it. And I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. So, but he said that Ushu wasn't called Ushu at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm like, as far as I know, it was.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that entire section, and I think, I'd have to go look at the cuneiform record and look at it in a little more detail and see about what it was called during the early 6th century. Of course, we know what it was called in the late 7th century, but the interesting thing that I thought while listening to that section was, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I don't mean that.
It's not. The point was that this prophecy is clearly about the island city, not the other city. Even if it's called Tyre now, it's still about this part over here.
I mean, this is what's so interesting about it, because looking at the text, which is, I think, what maybe is the component that's missing in all of this. Looking closely at the text, not just in 26, but also in 27 and 28, the other prophecies against Tyre. We just focus on 26 because that's what it's talking about, the destructive, aspect of it. But 27, but anyway, but the point is that the text describes the immediate slaughter of the mainland cities, the daughter cities, of which Ushu is one, whatever you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the island city is that which is out in the midst of the sea, right? So when you look at things like verse 3, 3 or 4, it might be 4. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where it splits, but where it talks about, he will be scrape the rubble clean, be made.
I think
be made into
splits,
a bare.
yeah.
Okay, a bare rock and the place for the spreading of nets, which, by the way, is not to fish; it's to dry them.
Yeah, pointed that out when he
okay.
By the fish.
I
remembered what it was I wanted to ask when I
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, so I was just wondering if you heard it, what you thought of CJ's argument that had the scripture that Knock offered, where Ezekiel seems to be admitting that what he prophesied did not come to pass. CJ's argument was, well, no, because if he admitted that his prophecy didn't come to pass, they would have killed him.
Yeah. So this was, and if you read, there was a part that I caught where you said Daniel Block, and he said sort of out of hand, well, Daniel Block's just wrong. I laughed out loud, actually, at that point. And not to say that a person can't be wrong, but Daniel Block is sort of if I went and got his, this is the New International Commentary of the Old Testament for Jeremiah, but you see how thick that is. He's got 2 volumes this thick on the book of Ezekiel, right? One for the first half and one for the second half. Daniel Block in the Nikot series is it's sort of a standard by which, everybody quotes Daniel Block. So the idea that he's just wrong about it is, if it, well, anyway, yeah. So, so no, I don't think for a second that, that there's a one-to-one, that there's a necessary correspondence, that the whole point of Ezekiel writing in chapter 29 was to say this was God's plan all along. Mm-hmm. This is the whole point of the and in fact, Block has a really interesting quote in that section. And of course, it's not just him. Similarly has something similar to this. I think also Greenberg But the idea is that I think it's back in chapter 13, you have this supportive oracle that comes. I think it's in 13. But certainly in 29, it's like 15 years have gone by, right? And Tyre didn't fall. And it's become clear that Tyre didn't fall. And the things that happened. And so at that point, the people probably were going, what's up, man? Like, how come? And oracle from the Lord, right?
Yeah.
This was God's plan, right? This was God's doing. And so one of the things that Greenberg actually mentions and that's in the Yale commentary series, that's very interesting, is that he sees this as a sign of the authenticity of that section of the text, because Ezekiel is debated, like what's original and what's not, whatever. But the fact that that's in there seems to lend credence to its veracity, right? To the fact that it was actually an oracle by Ezekiel. So no, I don't. I understand the quandary, and I understand the point.
Well, yeah,
yeah,
that speaks to me, like, as you said, 15 years later, and I didn't get into that nuance, and I probably should have, because I think that because we kept saying 13 years, and it was actually 15 years, in such a stretch of time, and then, of course, he's trying to stretch it all the way to Alexander the Great, but, the fact that Ezekiel 15 years later felt the need to do that amending prophecy, that speaks to the fact that, he might have been under some heat at that moment if he's going to actually contradict himself, and then now award, it was God's plan all along. God is going to give Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar now, so.
Which didn't come to pass either.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like we never bring that up, but the Egypt one didn't happen either. So
I just wonder if when Ezekiel is telling everybody that, like, if he's like, yeah, that was God's plan all along. Yeah, that's the ticket. That's
yeah. Let me look at your future through the seer stone. I'm not. That's the thing. Like, I didn't want to get to a disrespectful realm and say, hey, this guy is just, he's a false prophet. Like, clearly he is. I didn't want to go that route. I just wanted to point out, hey, this is what your own scholarship is telling you.
Well, this is what's interesting about it. I know I keep saying that before everything that I say, but I find this to be an expert.
I find all of this to be interesting. Go ahead, John.
You said false prophet. Is there any other kind?
Well, the point is, I'm trying not to be disrespectful.
Right. I know.
It's interesting to look at how, for example, rabbinic scholars, like in the Talmud, dealt with these passages, particularly chapter 29. And, I think it's Rashi that makes the comment, and maybe Radak as well, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But the argument or the way that they understand that passage where, he says every head was made bald and every shoulder rubbed raw, but he got no wages. What they say about that is, well, when they finally did break into Tyre, because that's what they conclude that they did break into the island city, the sea, as prophesied in chapter 26, down in verse 19, 20, 21, wherever it's at, the sea washed over the island city and washed all the treasures away. And that's why they didn't get it. Right? So the way that they interpreted it, because that's what they're doing. They're using the biblical text to try to explain other biblical texts. They said, well, he obviously got in because chapter 26 said he was going to get in, but the reason he didn't get any pay or wages was for his army is because the sea washed it away. So they didn't view this as there's some later, the many nations is talking about some later, people group to come. In fact, they say in their commentaries on chapter 26, verse 7 or verse 3, the many nations, that is Nebuchadnezzar, right? Mm-hmm. So, and this was really where I saw things sort of hinging in the discussion, is what to do with this many nations. Would you say that's true? That was sort of a sticking point?
Yeah, and yeah, I kept trying to point out that it's clearly referring to Nebuchadnezzar, or Nebuchadnezzar, however you pronounce it. But and he kept going. Yeah, he literally kept going to, well, it says many nations, and you know, if it wouldn't mean this one guy, this one nation, and I'm like, well, of course it does. I mean, and he then went on to give me some apologetic about, well, you know, like they had modern day alliances, and that's just how all empires were back then. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's
but
true.
that substantiates your point.
Well,
that
yeah,
substantiates your point.
and that does substantiate the point. And as I pointed out, because I'm like, Tyre's army wasn't some, you know, alliance of nations. You know, it's one city state. They have their army, they have their navy. Sure, maybe Egypt was like that, but I don't even think necessarily Egypt's army, I believe back then, would have been mainly made up of Egyptians as well. It was Babylon conquering all these nations. They were the superpower at the time.
So, I mean, like, here's where this is for me. The text itself goes in, I think, a fair amount of detail to talk about what Nebuchadnezzar is going to do, right? And if you're going to argue against the grain of the natural reading of this, straightforward reading, whatever it is we want to say, you have to then take this phrase goyim rabim, the many goyim, the many nations, and make that subsequent nations chronologically, right? So then the question is, and he seemed to say this, if I remember, that the text, this many nations, it seemed like he said, sure, it could mean, like a mixed multitude, an army consisting of people from many, goyim, all at once in one army. It could mean that. It seems like he said that, if I'm remembering that right. Or it could also mean many nations, meaning Babylon now, and then later, Alexander the Great, and whatever other nation that thrown. So then the question is, what does it mean, right? So what you would want to do first is look at other descriptions of the Babylonian army in the biblical text. That seems like the logical thing to do, which is why in that PowerPoint, Jeremiah 34:1 and Ezekiel 23:23 are there, right? And I've got, this is Thompson's, I held it up earlier. This is Thompson's commentary on Jeremiah. But Jeremiah 34:1, if you just indulge me for a second, the word which came to Jeremiah from Yahweh when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his entire army, together with the kingdoms and peoples of the earth subject to his rule, were attacking Jerusalem and all her towns. So let me just read that part again. When Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his entire army, together with the kingdoms and peoples of the earth subject to his rule, were attacking Jerusalem and all her towns.
That basically is synonymous with many nations. That phrase.
And so his comment on this, the picture, verse 1, commentary on this, the picture is of a suzerain with contingents of troops from the vassal states. It is one of the terms of a treaty between a suzerain and a vassal when that vassal supplied troops to assist the overlord in a campaign against his enemies. The attack on Jerusalem and the outlying towns of Judah was simultaneous. Judean forces were driven back into their fortified towns, which were captured one by one while Jerusalem was held under a tight blockade. Right? So that's, if you're looking at descriptions, and we can pull up 2323, but it has the same idea. It talks about Pekod and Shoah, and I can't remember the other one, and then the Assyrians, right, that are under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. In other words, this is how the Babylonian army is described. And if you read John Brinkman's book, Prelude to Empire, he goes into some detail about what the Babylonian nation, area was made up of, right? So you have the Chaldeans, you have Arameans, you have native Babylonians, you have these other vassal states. And the point is that, okay, if we're going to say for a second that it can mean either one, right? Many nations can be making up the army with a bunch of vassal contingencies, whatever. Or it can mean Babylon now, and then another nation later, and then another nation later. Which one accords better, fits better with the context, right? And which one fits better with the way that the Babylonian army is described in other passages, even in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
So, like, for me, if you're going to stand on the many nations argument, you have several things to overcome. One, the way that the Babylonian army is described in several places. Two, as you pointed out, I think very well, the structure of the passage. The fact that you have section 1, for thus says the Lord Yahweh, section 2, and how, like in chapter 31, I think, where it's describing the attack on Egypt, the same sort of general statement, summary statement, and then more explicit statement made in the second paragraph, joined in the exact same way. That one is being then later developed by two. And by the way, this is mainstream consensus scholarship. This is what people say about this passage. Yeah. This is not some fringe thing.
Yeah, because and he was really, and I'm going to step away again and mix up this mac and cheese, but I can still hear you when I'm away, Dr. Josh, so please continue. But yeah, this is what he kept saying, Nakatsuchi's saying, and that's why I was like, no, actually this time Nakatsuchi's not saying this. Your biblical scholarship is,
And what's interesting about that is that, CJ seemingly wants to eschew scholarship, yet his scholarship seems to be comprised solely of his opinion. And when, he made a claim, and I can't remember, Knock had said something about how the scholarship has a consensus on this. And CJ said, not all of them. And Knock asked, well, name one who doesn't. And he went on to hem and haw, and he gave that name that wasn't the guy wasn't even a scholar. He ended up being a preacher. And then he said something to the effect of, I would have had more citations, but I didn't go into looking that up. And I'm listening to it backstage, and I'm going, well, where'd you think you were coming today, man?
Yeah.
You didn't come with any more citations. Like, this is the debate right now.
And I think this is one of the things that it's the reason, or I know I've said this, but it's the reason our channel does what it does, is we're trying to sort of bridge this gulf between active research institutions and scholars in those institutions and that are doing cutting edge research, right? That are pushing the envelope, and they're digging into new things, and they're translating through these new texts that are being found, and they're tying together interpretive models to sort of marry the data and what we see in archaeology and all this stuff. These people in these research institutions often don't have time to produce books, to write books that are at a popular level that interested non-specialists can really get a hold of, and at the same time push the envelope in their own research, right? Oftentimes it's like, all right, well, I'm just going to write my conference paper, and then I'm going to publish that, and then I'm going to turn that into a chapter for this book so I can get tenure, and those are all great things, but they can often be very technical. And I think the reason that our channel is successful in this regard is because we're not, like, I'm not digging, I'm not breaking new ground. Like, I'm not a research scholar in the sense that I don't work at a research institution. I'm not spending all day in the library. What I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, who's writing on Ezekiel, right? Who's writing on Tyre? Who's writing on, Phoenician coast? Who's writing on this stuff? Who's writing on prophecy? And now let me read through the secondary literature. Let me read through the primary literature, through the texts themselves. And let me say, okay, so now I understand what they're arguing. Here's what broad consensus is on this particular thing. I'm going to package this in a way that's nice and neat. And then I'm going to say, here's what consensus scholarship says. Could it be wrong? I guess, yeah. I mean, maybe in certain details, but I feel like you have a huge hill to climb to overturn consensus scholarship in that way. And generally speaking, that has to be done by a specialist in the field. This idea that somebody that doesn't read these languages, that hasn't gone to school for this stuff, is going to come along and make, an argument that's going to overturn all the specialists in the field that do this for a living.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Well, I mean, it harkens back to the other night when you were on a channel, and, CJ is essentially saying, well, since I don't have the same expertise as you do, I don't know if what you're telling me is true, when you speak of an ancient language or something like that. And that's, I mean, like you pointed out at the time, it's always good to be skeptical. I mean, especially if you're not well versed on a certain topic, you don't want to take somebody's word for it. Right. But I mean, to formulate that opinion without doing any due diligence at all, without going and looking into it, I mean, he could go to your channel and learn some things off of some of your videos. Google's a wonderful thing. He could have fact checked you on what you said, but instead his reaction is to say, yeah, I can't take that. I have to take that as not true because I don't know the language and he does.
Yeah. And I think for me with this, I'm writing I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm writing another book that is basically taking these video series, these sort of controversial video series that I've done, like the dating of the Book of Daniel, the Ezekiel 26. There's going to be a slavery chapter. There's going to be a rape chapter. There's going to be maybe a homosexuality in the Hebrew Bible chapter. I'm not sure. But sort of all these kind of controversial things that come up a lot when atheists and Christians debate each other. And the sole purpose of that book is to say, all right, look, everybody, here's what scholars are saying about this. Here's what they're arguing. And when there's division among scholars, here's where it is. Here's, for example, what's being said about slavery is a far greater consensus, or a greater consensus than maybe what's said about the dating of the Book of Daniel, because you do have a few evangelical scholars that are in the field that would still argue for an early date. Now, again, it's still consensus that that the Book of Daniel is written in the 2nd century, but there are more evangelicals that would argue for an earlier date than there are that would say there's no slavery in the Hebrew Bible, right? Or in the legal sections of the Hebrew Bible. So, but the point is to try to present that in a way that is, I'm not an expert on slavery. I've done a lot of reading about it and I've worked with the text, but I mean, there are people that specialize in slavery far more than I do. So, I have a full-time job somewhere else, not doing academic research. So, but this is the issue with the Ezekiel 26 thing, is that consensus scholarship is not, that the place that people diverge is not in whether the prophecy was about Nebuchadnezzar and whether or not Nebuchadnezzar took Tyre or didn't take Tyre, and whether or not Ezekiel said that, the prophecy didn't come to pass the way that it was supposed to in 29. Those things are settled, right? That's not what's debated. What's debated is theologically what's going on. So again, Robert Chisholm would say, well, prophecies are contingent, and this is evidence of that. So that still maintains the inerrancy of Scripture, and it still maintains that God is a good God that doesn't. This isn't a false prophecy because God is doing something different, and so we need to think about it differently. Now, again, I disagree with that, but
right,
that's where the diversion. I mean, that's where things sort of divert.
Do any of the, you talk about the consensus, are there any scholars out there, any academics who would claim, as CJ did, that Alexander fulfilled the prophecy 200 years later?
If they do, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. And by the way, when I talk about scholarship, I'm talking about like people that work in the Hebrew Bible, right? People that this is their specialization, not somebody that got a theology degree in New Testament studies or something. Not that that's bad. I'm not saying that that's bad, but that's a different field.
Right.
I can't think of any. Certainly, the argument would not be that Ezekiel intended Alexander, and that's a critical distinction.
Yeah.
In the same way that Isaiah, I can't think of a scholar in the field that would argue that Isaiah, be it one, a single Isaiah, which there aren't a lot of people that I think would make that argument, though there are some evangelical scholars that would say one Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah. But I don't know of anybody arguing about Isaiah 53 would say, no, Deutero-Isaiah meant Jesus.
Yeah, and I couldn't hammer him down on that, and I probably should have tried harder. And I'm not saying that CJ dodged that at all because it only came up once. I only brought it up once, but I did say, it's clear that Ezekiel's intent was that this was going to be Nebuchadnezzar doing it, right? So, and probably no fault of his own. I don't think that he ever addressed that, and I think that is a key point here. Is Ezekiel's prophecy, I mean, according to by the terms of the debate, is what Ezekiel intended when he made his prophecy. Now, if God had some other intention, that's all, there's no way that we could possibly know that. So, according to the debate, even if what he's saying is true, by debate standards, that's an argument that doesn't even really apply to the debate. But granting that, as I said before, Alexander's the closest, that he's the only one that came even remotely close, but he didn't come close at all. He didn't destroy the city, or it's not a forgotten relic, and all of those things that you've pointed out. But yeah, I felt, because I brought that up once, Dr. Josh, and I feel like that's one point where I probably should have stuck that home a couple more times. Hey,
yeah,
Ezekiel's
and I didn't pick up on that, because what you're saying is so true, that it's all well and good for CJ to try and say, well, actually it was fulfilled later, and that's, but that still doesn't go to the point of the debate, like you're saying, because it was, did the prophecy of Tyre as it was laid out in Ezekiel, did that get fulfilled? And regardless of the arguments of whether, God changed his mind, or God, changed, made it happen at a later date, that's not what it says in Ezekiel.
Well, and before Dr. Josh goes on, because I'm enjoying this, we can go as long as you want to go, Dr. Josh. So whenever you need to go, you just let me know. I put the link in. If you guys want to come in, let me know. I'll throw the link in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, post that link again. Yeah. I wanted to say, that atheist pastor had Brian Stevens had asked that what's going on with atheist pastor. He says, just sitting here soaking up everything Dr. Josh is saying, and Brian Stevens said Dr. Josh is the best Assyriologist on the internet. No one better disagree with me, not even Dr. Josh.
Well, that's nonsense, because Irving Finkel is on the internet. So I mean,
if you want, come on in and talk to Dr. Josh.
Well, yeah, and
I appreciate that.
And please continue, because I find this era of history really, really fascinating. I mean, and if you think about it, because everybody has seen the movie 300, a great movie about a great moment in time where a really small force stood in the face of Xerxes and a very similar Babylon horde, right? And here you have this very small island of Tyre that Ezekiel is prophesying. You're not going to last. You better be packing your bags, homeboys, because you're going to be meeting God real soon, right? And they last for 13 years against this superior force. And to me, it's almost like this argumentation. You're taking away from what Nebuchadnezzar actually accomplished. Or what Tyre actually accomplished in the face, in the face of such odds, and that's one of the things. And I had to point him out. And I actually brought up afterwards. I brought up Eli's what you had sent me from her book, from her book, and read to him where it was describing just the superior navy force keeping Nebuchadnezzar off of the shores of Tyre, and that's literally. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna have to send you this because here it's literally showing you, Nebuchadnezzar never made it to Tyre. He never got to the island because their navy was keeping him at bay for 13 years. Eventually, he figured out, you stop these routes to allow supplies in. But they managed to last for 13 years in the face of superior odds. I mean, to me, that's phenomenal.
And this was one of the reasons that I heard him mention Katzenstein, which. He said, Dr. Josh loves Katzenstein. And I mean, I don't know that I have emotional feelings for him, but like his book is the standard work on, I'm just teasing. I know he didn't mean that, but this book is a standard work on Tyre, and it's a little dated. I think it was written in either the late 70s, early 80s, I think. But it's cited all over the place. And the reason I found it interesting that he quoted Katzenstein is Katzenstein does not hold his position. And maybe you guys can clear this up because I may have just caught it at a glance and didn't. But he seemed to be focusing in a lot on there were people that lived in Ushu and that during times of attack, they would go to the island fortress.
Yeah, I think what he was trying to say was that the island fortress was basically just for the clergy. The clergy and like a seat of government or something like that, and that people lived in Ushu, and that the two were connected like Yonkers. He kept bringing up New York and Yonkers, which I'm like, you can't compare the ancient Near East to modern day New York. And but his analogy was that, like, essentially, Ushu, whether it was called Ushu or not, because he was maintaining it wasn't called Ushu at the time, it was still Tyre. They're both the same. And you admitted in your opening that, because that shocked me. Like, and you're right, because it did throw me for a loop when he concentrated on many nations and not they, because I was prepared for the they argument probably more than the many nations. But it shocked me when he went there with it. It was like, how do I even really argue against that?
I don't really understand the significance of it, I suppose. So, right, there are certainly houses that were on the island city. Now they may have been. I don't know enough about the makeup of the island city, and I don't know that we, from a research standpoint, I know that I can't remember the archaeologist's name now that dug there, but I think they only got down to the levels were only there to around 700, and then after that, Roman occupation had destroyed what was there in the place that they dug, which was not like a vast area, but. So I don't think we have a lot archaeologically past the 7th century, but I mean, let's just say for a second that the island city was completely abandoned for the most part until people attacked, and then everybody left Ushu and the other mainland daughter cities. There's more than one. They left those and hi, baby. Yeah, what's up? Soon, 10 minutes. How about that? Okay, I love you. Okay, make sure you finish before I go to bed.
I can see how Dr. Josh became a PhD. When he was a child. I got a question.
That's so true. But so if if we're saying that when an attack was imminent, which you would see coming, that majority, whatever, of the people would move into the island fortress, would swell into the island fortress. Yeah, that's how it was. I mean, what does that do?
Yeah.
Because the text says that Nebuchadnezzar is going to massacre the mainland cities, right? The daughter villages, the daughter cities that are on the shore, and then going to break into the island city as a man breaches a wall, like a city wall.
Well, yeah,
right?
and
So
he's making that argument, Doctor, and I don't think he realized that. And I should have really honed in on it in the heat of the debate. Is all right. So you're saying that the seat of power is there, right? Like that's the seat. I mean, that's the seat of the power. And he did admit in his opening, like, yeah, I acknowledge Ezekiel is talking about the island city. So, but now you can't. Now you want it both ways, and you can't do that.
Yeah, I'm not, that I don't understand. And I mean, like during, of course, the Amarna period's back in the 14th century, but we have a handful, maybe 10, I think 10 letters from the island of Tyre, where the king, Abdi Milki, I think, I can't remember. That's terrible, but it's been a while. But he wrote to the Pharaoh talking about how the Sidonians had taken over the mainland cities and weren't allowing them to like bury their dead in a cemetery. Right. So this is why, like those islands, I mean, sorry, not that, did I say the island cities? I meant the mainland cities.
Yeah, the mainland cities.
So like those mainland cities were very important to the island city of Tyre. And in the Neo-Assyrian inscriptions, I mean, you showed it, they make the distinction between this Tyre in the midst of the sea and Ushu on the mainland. I mean, they make the distinction. So whatever it is that, you know, I suspect that it was still called Ushu. I'd have to look back at, you know, the royal inscriptions and see if there's anything there that talks about them. But why that would matter, I'm not sure.
It seems it does seem very weak argumentation in the face of all the scholarship. You know, like, you know, I everybody knows I'm highly skeptical of biblical scholarship, especially if I could see its bias. So I know, like, you go with the fundamentals, and to me, I'm like, I don't trust you, you know. But like, if you're a Christian, it seems like you wouldn't that wouldn't be an issue for you, and that's why, like, you know, I try to be very careful not to use secular sources. And I was very transparent that I had you helping me out with all of this. But I mean, this is an argument that I've made several times. But this is the excuse me, I'm losing everything. This is the first time that I've really had just like the Christian scholarship behind this and saw it with my own eyes. Like, yeah, like, you know, you have your Christians out here trying to argue that this prophecy was indeed fulfilled, but those that actually devote their lives to studying this issue, they know that it wasn't, and they move on. And as you said, you know, they're still Christians. You know, it hasn't changed their faith, knowing that, you know, Tyre didn't fall to Nebuchadnezzar. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say my goodbyes and let you two finish up. But I want to ask Dr. Josh. How did I do watching the clock?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get to see the whole thing, but I mean, you seem like you were, you know, heard the alerts going off, letting people have the last sentence. It was good. Yeah, the 11 minutes in the beginning. I'm really proud of you, John. It's good.
It's cool. I feel like you patted me on the back.
Well, I appreciate you moderating, John, and hanging out all day. We have been streaming for quite a while today, so thank you, John.
Yep, I'll speak to you tomorrow. We're doing another Matt thing tomorrow.
Matt Powell, noon. I've got Andy that from the Damn Show in the mornings, and so I'll be reaching out to a couple more people. If you're interested,
Lone Wanderer wanted to come on again. Remember?
All right, yeah. So cool. Yeah, so I 2 more spots.
Right, and then like maybe not. Yeah. Well, I don't want to say it live, but hello.
No, I'm waiting on you.
Well, you guys froze up on. I thought my screen froze. You know what I'm trying to say.
Probably. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Later.
All right, man.
See you, John.
One of these days, John will say, if you don't want to say it live, then you don't mention it live. I kid with
Well, let
John.
me ask you, what was there before I have to run? Was there anything else that sort of stood out that you thought?
Well, I got hung up, and he even acknowledged how most people are going to go with talk about that little they there. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on many nations. And I felt like I was prepared for that, but I really feel like I could have probably done as you did. I think a little more eloquently than I did. Just really pointed out, no, this was the common description in your own Bible about Nebuchadnezzar's army. I think that was my one real weak area. Outside of my little slip, look, I thought I was right when I said Alexander didn't tear down the city, but I kind of granted that in the middle of the debate, even though it turns out I was right. But outside of that, I thought that was probably my weakness, the only one.
I mean, here's the thing, and I'm sure that you learned this long before I did, given that you've been on social media longer than I have. But I learned that unless you can prove, and even then, always, unless you can say, no, this clearly shows you how X can equal X, it equals Y. If there's even a hint of a possibility in the other person's mind, there's no way to change the mind. So, if you have Isaiah 7:14 using the word Alma, and we say, well, we would probably expect Bethulah if it was going to be a virgin, and the Septuagint's probably doing some sort of a theological thing, maybe doing a theological thing with Parthenos, because there's a possibility that it can mean virgin, that that Alma can mean virgin or can be used that way. That's all you need. Right. And so you're never going to, if it's possible that Goyim Rabim can be understood as Babylon and then another nation and then another nation later, as long as that's possible, I don't think you've got much of a prayer. The thing is, I think that the people watching, understood. And that's, to me, that's what's most important.
Yeah, and hearing you say that I represented the history well, that goes a long way. So yeah, I feel good about the debate. I usually watch it back, and I always try to leave it to the audience. But I know CJ feels like he did well, but I think I did pretty good, and I feel, to me it's a no-brainer, and I think to you it's probably a no-brainer. So from his perspective, he probably argued his points very well, but he's arguing it in the face of knowledge, no knowledge, I guess would be the best way to put it. So, yeah.
I think the last thing that I'll say about this, and people should know this, almost exclusively, I don't take on fights that I don't think I can win.
Yeah.
I am not an adventurer. I don't take, there's a reason that I haven't debated this, what's talked about in that homosexuality video, because it's not consensus scholarship, and I don't even know that I have an opinion on whether he's right or not. Because how could I have an opinion if I haven't done all the legwork on it? But I think he's a reputable scholar that had a really interesting argument. But there's a reason that I don't do that. And people have asked me, debate me on the homosexuality video. No, why? Why would I do that? Yeah. I'm not convinced of it, so why would I do that? But that means that if I say, hey, you know what? I'll debate you on Ezekiel 26. Know that I'm coming at this with the consensus behind me, because I'm not that good, right? I can't work magic. I can't debate my way out of a wet paper bag. So I only take on these fights that I think that I can step aside and let the data fight for me. So
well, yeah, and that's I'm kind of the same way for a different reason, because I toss a lot of stuff out there, and what sticks, and the prophecy of Tyre has always stuck. You know, it's
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
apologetics, but you know, the truth is the truth. So it's one of the things that I settle on that a lot. You know, to me, if this, if you believe this is in the inherent word of God, well, this proves it's not. All right, so let's get beyond that inherent word of God. Let's talk about how we can apply this book to the modern day, because I'm sure if God exists, he doesn't care about the things you think he does. So like that's ultimately where I try to go with it every time.
Right.
So thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Josh, and
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I feel like I feel smarter, and it's because I now, and moving forward, when I make statements about Tyre, as it happens with all of these debates, and this is one of the reasons why I like debating, because it forces me to take time, do the research, and learn. And now, instead of knowing that I'm right, I can know why I'm right, and that's always important. And I have you to thank for that, so thank you.
Oh gosh, no, you're very welcome for what I could do. So.
All right, so audience, and if you want to take off, Dr. Josh, I'm just going to say goodbye to them, and I know you need to get to your family, and I've got to get to my dinner. So thank you so much, Dr. Josh. Audience, thank you for hanging out today. Hopefully these connection issues will get better. It's got to be a YouTube thing. It's got to be a YouTube thing. It'll be better tomorrow. So thank you for being here, and thank you, patrons. I will make that new slide tomorrow. So peace. Have a good one.